Hi, so today I want to talk about All-Star Superman made by Grant Morrison with illustrations by Frank Quitely and Jamie Grant. Just wanted to get the names of the author and the artist. And all I got to say is this is one of the best Superman stories. And I know I'm not the first to say it, nor will I be the last to say it, but this story, in my opinion, shows why Superman is deeper than people give credit for. And if you are new to comics, you don't really know much about comics, this story is an Elseworld story, meaning that it doesn't matter to the main continuity. You could just pick up this story out of curiosity. I will say Grant Morrison loves the Silver Age of comics, especially if you read his Batman run, which is phenomenal, by the way. It introduced Damian Wayne. But if you have not read that run, but you're not sure about Grant Morrison's work, they've done so much and made so many stories. So Grant Morrison wrote the Superman story as sort of a love letter to the Silver Age of comics, but all aspects of Superman, especially Clark slash Superman's humanity. Because throughout this story, the main theme of it is what makes Superman Superman? Who is Superman? Why is Superman the way he is? Why is Clark slash Superman the way they are? It kind of plays into elements that we see in other forms of media, that Clark Kent's somewhat of the disguise, the clumsy, bumbling Clark Kent is the disguise, and Superman's the real identity. And it's not like Clark is Superman's real identity and the fake identity is the hero. No, the hero is the personification of the goodness that Clark Kent is, while Clark is sort of a lesser down, watered down version of Superman. But the story does do a good job balancing it, especially with the opening scene with Clark and how he's bumbling and falling down. But let's get to the premise. What is the plot? What is the premise? So the plot and premise of this story is, what if Superman's about to die? Because Superman in the story gets radiation poisoning mysteriously, and he gets sick and is about to die, but he grew in power exponentially. And it's cool what they do. They show like a panel of him going to like these super advanced like scientists to get tested, because see, Superman, he doesn't have a normal doctor. He has to go to like these scientists in this institute, and they study him. And I do wonder if Gunn is going to pull from that, because I know James Gunn is definitely wanting to base a lot of this movie themes from All-Star Superman, because a lot of pictures are of James Gunn and the cast reading All-Star Superman. So if they do want to get inspiration for a Superman comic, this is a great place to start, and what made me read it. But throughout the story, we just see Clark slash Superman do good deeds, and we get to see kind of like the cast of characters at the Daily Planet. We get interactions with Lois Lane, obviously. We even get some wholesome story with Lois Lane where she gets superpowers for 24 hours. And we get a cool Jimmy Olsen story, which I was kind of dreading when I first read it, because Jimmy Olsen, he's kind of comic relief-ish, kind of forgettable character. But I like the dynamic of Jimmy Olsen in the story and the whole graphic novel in general. Jimmy Olsen is kind of an MVP slash great comic relief in this. We even get a great story where he's trying to like calm Clark down, because I forgot exactly what it was, because I did read this recently, but I kind of put it down a while back, so memory isn't the most fresh with all the small details. So I just got done with it, so I don't remember every little thing. But we see Jimmy calm Clark slash Superman down, and what's beautiful about that is we get a wholesome moment where Clark's like, Jimmy, good job, you're not useless, I'm proud of you, I appreciate you, you're such a good person. We get so many cool stories. We even get a cool retelling of Pa Kent's death, which has been told multiple times. But this one is unique in a different way, because we get to see a bunch of Supermen try to stop a meteor to help Clark save his dad, and that's kind of the twist. And that one's cool to me. And they pull a lot of Easter eggs and deep cuts to alternate versions of Superman and alternate takes on the character. I will say that that part of the comic did confuse me at first until I got to the very end. which I don't want to spoil the ending to this comic, but it is fantastic and you will appreciate the ending once you make it there. I will say this has some of the best writing for Lex Luthor because it just shows that in Lex's twisted mind, he thinks he's the hero. We get a whole section of Lex and Clark talking to each other. Clark's trying to interview Lex to see what Lex is up to get any answers out of Lex. So it's kind of like Clark is like, hey, Lex, I want to know what you're up to, without saying I want to know what you're up to, because he's like, I want to do an investigation and a story because that makes sense, because he's a journalist. And that's another thing Morrison does right, is Morrison does a good job making the Daily Planet matter. And when I say the Daily Planet, I mean he makes the whole cast lived in and fleshed out, and that is my favorite aspect of this story. Clark really is seen as kind of bumbling with them, but then when we see him as Superman, we get all the wholesome moments. We all know the iconic scene where he stops the girl from jumping off the building, taking her life. That scene is considered one of the most popular scenes in the story, and that's not the only sort of wholesome and pure inspirational Superman moment we get in the story. We have a whole section where I'm not going to spoil where all this happens in the story. I don't want to ruin it in case you haven't read it, because this video isn't a substitute for reading this comic. But I will say the beauty is we see Clark help Bizarro out and his planet, and then we kind of get to see a version of a Bizarro that's an outcast, but that version speaks normally, speaks like us, instead of hate you meaning love, or love meaning hate, or we don't love you meaning we do not hate you. Bizarre language is complicated and kind of just backwards, but I like what Morrison does with it, and even makes Bizarro a sympathetic character and an interesting character. So Morrison, you can tell throughout the story, is very into the character of Superman and writes the character very well. Although I will say the story is pretty absurdist at times, so it depends how much you like the Silver Age of comics, or if you like any Silver Age stories. But I would say this book for sure is a love letter to the Silver Age. Some of this are deep cuts to the character, and I love it. We even get moments with Krypto. We get moments talking about the Phantom Zone. We literally get at the tail end of the story, just like I said, the Bizarro invasion. And we get a story where Clark has to fight two Kryptonians that are mad at Clark for not freeing the city of Kandor, which, if you know, the city of Kandor is the city Brainiac shrunk down in the comics, and that was on planet Krypton. So you really get to see deep cuts like that, but finally shown to be deeper and, how do I say, fleshed out, when other writers don't really get to flesh them out because of main continuity reasons, and they got to stick to the status quo and adherence to it. This story, because of this premise, gets to kind of just toy with the Superman premise and character, but gets to make it stand alone and gets to have this character have a beginning, middle, and end. Yes, it's an alternate version of the character, but I will say this is a good read if you've never really read a Superman comic and you're kind of like me, who's like, I get the gist of the character. I've liked him in animation. I've liked him in TV and movies. I love the Christopher Reeves movies, me personally. Love those movies, especially the first, actually just the first two, to be honest. The last few of his run wasn't great, in my opinion, but the first two Reeves movies, fantastic movies, excellent movies. So I really got to say, this storyline is pretty good. Like, All-Star Superman does a good job with so many twists, so many turns. It at a time feels more like a TV show than a comic book. And I know comics are kind of like TV shows in the sense, like, there's cliffhangers, there's different episodes, there's different scenarios each week to week. But reading this graphic novel is amazing because it's kind of like you're binging a show. And there are moments where you keep reading it. I was really invested into the story by the tail end, and I couldn't put down the comic. I would literally have people calling me saying, oh, what are you doing? I'm like, I was just reading a Superman comic. And they would ask me, is it good? And I'm like, actually, yeah, it's great. So I recommend All-Star Superman if you've never read the character in comic book form. If you are interested in the character, I understand why you're like, Superman, I'm not really into him. He's very like, life is perfect. Doesn't really have that much depth, but this is a must read for any Superman fan, and especially if you're going to want to see James Gunn's Superman Legacy, I recommend reading it. It's not essential to enjoying that movie because I know Gunn is pulling from other Superman comics. But if I had to recommend a comic to read, I recommend Super All-Star Superman to read before James Gunn's Superman in 2025, coming in July, which I'm so excited for that movie, by the way, which got me to read this comic. So I will say, you got to pick this comic up, check it out, and tell me what you think about it in the comics. If you comments, not comics. See, I'm messing up. Comments, and tell me if you've read All-Star Superman, if you're curious in All-Star Superman. Me personally, I recommend it to pretty much anybody who wants to get into Superman comics but isn't sure if they'll like the character. I say just read this comic, see what you think. And another Superman recommendation before I close out this video is Superman Smashes the Klan. A phenomenal story about Superman beating up, well, the Klan. I don't have it on me, but I did read it a while back, and that's a good one. So if you do want me to keep reviewing comics, you want to just see me keep reviewing movies and shows, click here to subscribe. Hope you enjoy my video, and hope you guys have a good evening, good afternoon, and a good night if you are watching it at any time. Peace out.